Sarah Chin had spent most of her adult life inside cockpits that ordinary people would never see. Yet on this flight, she tried to disappear into the background. Row 24, Seat C, just another passenger wearing jeans, a simple blue shirt, and the tired look of someone escaping months of nonstop work. United Flight 447 hummed smoothly through the sky, a Boeing 777 slicing across the Pacific on its way from San Francisco to Tokyo. Around her, the world felt peaceful. A man beside her snored softly with his mouth half open. The woman across the aisle tapped her screen while watching a movie, and flight attendants carried trays with polite, routine smiles. Nothing about this scene suggested danger or heroism. It all felt normal, almost too normal, the kind of quiet moment Sarah rarely allowed herself to enjoy. She took a sip of the bitter airplane coffee and didn't complain. She wasn't here to judge the drink. She was hiding from the intensity of her real life. Her laptop remained closed on the tray table, its screen untouched since takeoff. If anyone glanced her way, they would see nothing unusual, no hint of the extraordinary career she kept buried behind calm eyes. No one here knew that Sarah was a United States Air Force test pilot assigned to some of the most advanced and secretive aircraft programs in the country. No one knew she had spent the last week at Edwards Air Force Base running simulation after simulation for a new generation of control systems. No one knew that her call sign, Phoenix, carried a reputation that stretched across bases, briefing rooms, and pilot circles. She had earned that name 7 years earlier when she recovered an F-35 from a flat spin that all the computers declared unrecoverable. The aircraft should have been lost. She should have been lost. Yet she brought it home, calm and sharp, refusing to surrender to physics or fear. Since that day, she became the one they trusted with experimental aircraft, classified technology, and missions where failure meant disaster. But today she was simply Sarah, no rank, no uniform, no briefings. She had tucked her military ID deep into her wallet and promised herself 2 weeks of anonymity in Tokyo. 2 weeks to breathe, to walk streets where no one recognized her, to drink tea in quiet corners, to sleep without alarms or flight schedules. She let her head lean against the window and watched white clouds stretching endlessly below, looking soft and peaceful from 37,000 feet. For the first time in months, her muscles loosened. Maybe she could really pretend to be a normal traveler, someone who didn't carry the weight of secrets and responsibilities. Maybe she could simply exist without thinking about the next test flight or the next impossible challenge. She closed her eyes and allowed the hum of the engines to lull her into quiet thought. She replayed simulator moments in her mind, analyzing patterns the way test pilots were trained to do. But slowly, gently, her mind drifted away from work. She wondered how it would feel to land in Tokyo with no debriefing waiting for her. She wondered how long it would take before anyone recognized her name on internal reports and summoned her back. She wondered if she'd finally sleep more than 5 hours without dreaming of flashing warning lights or spinning aircraft. Maybe, she told herself, this trip was a small gift she actually deserved. Yet deep inside, a part of her stayed alert. Test pilots carried instincts that never fully shut off. Even here, behind passengers chatting, laughing, sleeping, she always listened to the engines. She always noticed the subtle tilt of wings, the slight vibrations of a long-range jet adjusting to air currents. It wasn't something she did consciously. It was simply who she was. When she opened her eyes again, the flight attendants were moving down the aisle with snack carts, chatting softly. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing hinted at trouble. Sarah exhaled, trying to settle deeper into her seat. And then, in an instant that split her peaceful thoughts in half, everything changed. There was no warning, no gradual shift, no sign to prepare for what happened next. Just one sudden, violent sound. A blast like thunder tearing through the body of the plane. The kind of sound that didn't belong in the sky at all. The explosion arrived without warning. One violent, ripping burst that split the quiet hum of the cabin like a crack of lightning inside a sealed metal tube. United Flight 447 jerked so sharply to the right that passengers slammed against armrests. Drinks flew upward, and a chorus of panicked screams filled the aisle. Sarah Chin felt the shift instantly. The right engine wasn't just failing, it had died catastrophically. The left engine strained with a harsh, uneven roar. fighting alone to lift a machine far too heavy for one side to carry. She reached for the seat back in front of her as the aircraft dipped into a steep, unnatural roll. Oxygen masks dropped like limp yellow vines from the ceiling. The floor tilted at an angle that made walking feel like climbing. Children cried. Adults gasped for breath. A baby wailed somewhere in the forward rows. But Sarah's mind snapped into a calm she knew too well, the quiet mental zone that came whenever a flight spiraled toward catastrophe. She unbuckled in one motion, bracing her legs, moving up the aisle as chaos swelled around her. The plane shuddered again, and passengers grabbed whatever they could, terrified of the invisible forces tossing the aircraft around. She pushed past trembling hands, gripping seatbacks to hold her balance while alarms beeped faintly through the cockpit door. She was almost at the forward galley when a flight attendant, pale and shaking, stepped in front of her with both palms raised. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. Please." Sarah met her eyes, steady and controlled. "I'm a United States Air Force test pilot," she said, projecting calm through the panic. "Your right engine is gone, and you're losing hydraulic control. I need to help the captain. Now." The aircraft jolted violently again, almost enough to knock them both off balance. The attendant looked toward the cockpit, fear tightening her features. Sarah could see the battle happening inside her, protocol versus survival. With trembling fingers, she grabbed the interphone and spoke urgently. Sarah waited, muscles locked, listening to the raw groaning of the wounded airliner. 10 seconds. 15. Then, finally, the heavy cockpit door unlatched. Inside was pure crisis. Captain Mike Brennan gripped the yoke so tightly his knuckles were white. The aircraft kept slipping right, refusing to obey. First Officer Jennifer Park flicked between radio calls and system checks, her voice forced into a steady Mayday rhythm while warning lights flashed relentlessly across the panel. Entire sections of the cockpit glowed red: hydraulics offline, engine shutdown, control surface failures, electrical instability. Sarah stepped forward. "Captain, I'm Sarah Chin, USAF test pilot. Let me assist." Mike looked at her for a full second, weighing everything: her posture, her eyes, her composure against the chaos behind him. In that instant, he chose to trust her. "Right engine exploded," he said through clenched teeth. "We lost hydraulics 1 and 3. Controls are fading fast. I can't hold altitude." Sarah studied the primary display. The descent rate was climbing. The nose kept dropping. The aircraft was becoming unresponsive in a way she recognized from test flights with simulated catastrophic failures. "What's our weight?" she asked. 260,000 pounds, Jennifer answered. "Too heavy for any runway nearby." "And closest airport?" "Honolulu. 600 miles. Sarah absorbed the data instantly. Hydraulics dying. Flight computers trying and failing to compensate. Asymmetric thrust dragging the aircraft into a rightward spiral. If they didn't stabilize soon, they would lose control entirely. She turned to the captain. "I know a method to keep this aircraft flying. It's not in your manuals. It's experimental and normally classified." Mike's voice cracked. "Will it save my passengers?" "Yes," Sarah answered. "If we act now." He nodded. "Tell us what to do." Sarah pulled out her phone, opened a calculator, and moved behind the thrust levers. "We're going to control the aircraft using precise thrust pulses instead of damaged hydraulics. I need you both to follow exactly." The plane dropped again, shaking hard. Sarah braced herself, took hold of the single working engine's lever, and began the delicate rhythm that would decide the fate of 200 souls. Sarah steadied her breathing as she wrapped her fingers around the thrust lever, feeling the subtle vibration of the remaining engine fighting against physics. The cockpit trembled with each uneven pulse of power. Warning chimes kept echoing, soft but relentless, like a heartbeat reminding them how little time they had left. Captain Mike and First Officer Jennifer watched her hands with anxious intensity. Everything depended on a technique they had never seen, never practiced, and certainly never imagined applying to a massive Boeing 777. "Listen carefully," Sarah said, eyes locked on the instruments. "Your computer algorithms were never designed for this kind of asymmetric damage. We're going to control the aircraft manually, through thrust variations, timed precisely." Mike shook his head slightly. "I tried adjusting thrust earlier. It barely changed anything." "You didn't apply it in the right pattern," Sarah replied calmly. This isn't about brute power. This is about rhythm. She eased the lever forward by a tiny amount, then eased it back, then forward again in a sequence that looked random but was anything but. Sarah's mind flashed back to the silent, cavernous hangars at Edwards Air Force Base, where she had tested the X-37's emergency control methods. Back then, these techniques were theoretical, studied in simulators, and flown in prototypes. Now she was applying those theories to a fully loaded airliner with hundreds of families depending on her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the aircraft responded. The right wing lifted a few degrees. The nose steadied. The violent yaw softened into a controlled sway. Jennifer stared at the flight path vector. It's actually working. It's creating microbursts of aerodynamic pressure, Sarah explained, still pulsing the thrust with absolute precision. Every adjustment changes the airflow. We're shaping stability instead of demanding it. Mike exhaled a shaky breath. How long can you keep that up? Long enough to teach you, Sarah said. Both of you need to learn this pattern. My arm won't hold for hours, but together we can rotate. She guided Jennifer first. The young first officer hesitated, then placed her hand on the lever. Sarah covered Jennifer's hand lightly with her own and guided the motion. Up 3%, down 2, up 4, hold, release, repeat. The rhythm was delicate and unforgiving. Get it wrong, and the aircraft would slip back into a deadly spiral. Jennifer's first attempt threw the plane sideways in a sudden lurch. Alarms blared. Mike gripped the yoke instinctively. Ease your wrist, not your whole arm, Sarah corrected gently. Let the engine breathe through your touch. Jennifer tried again. This time her movements were softer, more controlled. The aircraft steadied. Good, Sarah said. Feel the timing. Don't force the motion, guide it. After a few minutes, the descent rate slowed even more. The numbers stabilized on the altitude display. For the first time since the explosion, the cockpit felt like it had a heartbeat that wasn't panic. Mike switched with Jennifer next. His hands were strong but stiff with tension. He pulsed the lever too quickly, then too slowly. Sarah corrected him step by step, explaining the physics behind every subtle shift. Slowly, even Mike found the rhythm, though sweat trickled down his forehead from concentration. We're still too heavy to approach Honolulu, Sarah said after checking the fuel levels. If we land now, we'll overstress the remaining hydraulics. We need to burn fuel. Fuel dump, Mike asked. No, that uses hydraulics. If we divert any pressure now, we'll lose what little control we have left. Jennifer frowned. So what do we do instead? We fly, Sarah answered simply. We hold altitude and fly for hours if we have to. Circles, patterns, anything that keeps us stable until this aircraft is light enough to land. Mike stared at her. Hours. With this technique. Sarah nodded. We rotate controls. We keep our rhythm. And we survive. Jennifer swallowed hard but nodded. Then we do it. As they settled into the grueling cycle of thrust modulation, Sarah's phone vibrated unexpectedly. She frowned and checked the screen. A message from Edwards, encrypted, marked urgent. Data, charts, calculations, updated thrust profiles for emergency stabilization in large aircraft. The exact information she never thought she would need here, in this place, flying a broken airliner. Sarah unlocked the packet with her secure code and scanned the data. New patterns, improved stability algorithms, slight modifications that could ease their workload and keep the aircraft flying longer. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with relief. Edwards had heard her call. The team she trusted most had responded within minutes. Captain, Sarah said, straightening in her seat. I have updated parameters. This will make the aircraft smoother and the technique easier to maintain. She looked at Mike and Jennifer, both exhausted but focused. We're not out of danger, she whispered. But now we have a fighting chance. And for the first time since the engine exploded, hope felt real. High above the Pacific, two F-22 Raptors streaked into the sky from Hickam Air Force Base, leaving thin trails across the blue as they climbed toward the troubled airliner. Major David Viper Martinez led the formation, his fighter slicing through the air with controlled precision. He had been briefed only minutes earlier. A Boeing 777 was limping toward Honolulu with massive system failures, one engine out, and hydraulics nearly gone. The radar signatures were erratic, tiny dips and rises that looked like a heartbeat struggling to stay alive. Viper 1, Proceed to visual identification, the controller ordered. Copy, David replied, pushing the throttle and feeling the Raptor surge forward. In 7 minutes, the F-22s closed the distance. The giant airliner emerged from the haze, wounded, wobbling slightly, the right engine dark and torn. David pulled alongside the cockpit window, keeping a safe distance, and looked inside. Passengers stared back with wide, frightened eyes. The aircraft dipped right, then corrected itself in a strange, rhythmic motion David had never seen on a commercial plane. Honolulu Center, Viper 1 has visual, David reported. Right engine appears destroyed. Hydraulic fluid streaming from the wing. Aircraft is maintaining flight, but the control pattern is unusual. Inside the 777, Jennifer looked out the cockpit window and saw the sleek gray fighter. Relief washed over her face. "Company's here," she whispered. Sarah leaned forward, observing the Raptor's silhouette. She recognized the shape instantly, the angles, the wing line, the sensor housing. She had flown this exact model during test evaluations. She knew every bolt and vibration pattern. A deep certainty settled inside her. That pilot could help. "Captain," Sarah said, "patch me through to the military frequency. I need to talk to that F-22. Mike hesitated only a second before switching frequencies. "Viper 1, United 447. We have a passenger who requests direct communication. She says it's important." David frowned. This was highly unusual, but nothing about the flight looked normal. "United 447, go ahead." Sarah took the mic, steady as ever. "Viper 1, this is Captain Sarah Chin, United States Air Force test pilot, call sign Phoenix. Authentication code, Tango 79er Echo Delta." The silence that followed was brief, but charged. David inhaled sharply. Every fighter pilot had heard stories of Phoenix, the test pilot who recovered the impossible spin, who flew prototypes most people never knew existed. She was a legend, a quiet ghost of the Air Force. "Phoenix, Viper 1, David replied, his tone instantly respectful. "Authentication confirmed. How can we assist?" Sarah said, "We need support. I'm using experimental flight control techniques to stabilize the aircraft. Fatigue will become a factor soon. I need authorization from Edwards Air Force Base for updated thrust profiles and emergency guidance." "Understood. I'll request it now." David switched channels. "Hickam Command, Viper 1 requesting priority connection to Edwards AFB X-37 Program Office. Contact Colonel Peterson." Message from Phoenix herself. The request moved through channels faster than any standard protocol. Within minutes, Edwards confirmed. The secure data packet was sent to Sarah's phone, encrypted charts, thrust modulation refinements, and guidance techniques intended for advanced emergencies. When the message buzzed on her screen, Sarah felt a surge of gratitude. Edwards had heard her. Her colleagues, scientists, engineers, pilots she trusted with her life, had moved mountains for her in minutes. She ran calculations quickly, comparing the new data with the aircraft's current response. The adjustments were delicate, technical, but powerful. With these refinements, the oscillations would decrease, the workload would ease, and the rhythm would become more stable. "Captain," she said, "I have updated profiles. Let's implement them." Jennifer resumed the thrust modulation as Sarah instructed her through the new sequence. The aircraft responded more smoothly this time. The sway that had plagued them for the last 100 miles softened into a gentle, almost steady rhythm. David monitored from beside the cockpit, watching in awe as the crippled airliner flew with a grace that shouldn't have been possible. He switched to his wingman. "Viper 2, do you know who Phoenix is?" "No, sir. She's a legend," David replied. "If anyone can pull a broken aircraft out of the sky using nothing but physics and nerve, it's her." Inside the cockpit, the air felt different. Still tense, still heavy, but steadier. The numbers were stabilizing, altitude holding stronger than before, controls responding with more predictability. Jennifer exhaled shakily. "It's smoother. I can actually feel the timing now." Mike glanced at Sarah. "How long can we hold like this?" "As long as it takes," Sarah answered, eyes sharp. "We burn fuel. We keep rhythm. And when we're light enough, we land." Behind them, 200 passengers sat unaware of the woman in jeans and a blue shirt who was quietly rewriting the fate of the entire flight. And Sarah, Phoenix, knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't luck. This was preparation meeting destiny at 37,000 feet. Hours passed in the sky, but no one aboard United Flight 447 would ever remember them as ordinary hours. The aircraft traced wide circles over the ocean, a silent dance in the air guided by a single working engine, two exhausted airline pilots, and the steady, unbreakable presence of Phoenix. The F-22 Raptors flanked the 777 like metallic guardians, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. From inside the cabin, passengers whispered and pointed when they saw the fighters, drawing strength simply from knowing help was near. What they didn't know was that the real rescue was happening behind the reinforced door of the cockpit, where three people were fighting fatigue, physics, and time itself. The rotation of thrust control shifts had become a ritual. 30 minutes each. 30 minutes of relentless concentration, no blinking, no drifting thoughts, every motion measured with mathematical precision. Mike took the first rotation, his jaw clenched as he matched the rhythm Sarah had drilled into him. His timing wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to keep the aircraft steady. Jennifer followed, her hands sure, more fluid, her instincts aligning with the strange new pattern. Sarah rested only when she had to, rubbing her arms, stretching stiff muscles, but the exhaustion never clouded her focus. Every few minutes, she checked gauges, recalculated figures, and studied the stabilizing pattern of the aircraft like a surgeon monitoring a patient's heartbeat. Fuel is burning steadily, Jennifer reported, her voice thin but steady. We're down to 220,000 pounds. Good, Sarah said. Another hour, and we'll be at a safe landing weight. In the cabin, the flight attendants were fighting a different kind of battle, keeping passengers calm, comforting the anxious, offering water to trembling hands. One attendant peeked into the cockpit every so often, exchanging quick, hopeful glances with the crew. She could feel the tension, but also the confidence radiating from Sarah. Something about that calm presence told her everything might somehow be okay. Outside, the sun lowered toward the ocean, painting the clouds with hues of orange and gold. The F-22s adjusted their formation, still tight beside the massive airliner. In his cockpit, David watched the 777 with growing admiration. Most aircraft would have been lost within minutes after losing two hydraulic systems and a full engine. But this one held steady, swaying slightly, as if carried by a rhythm only Sarah understood. Viper 1 to Phoenix, David said over the military channel. Your control pattern looks smoother. Stabilization holding. Sarah lifted her headset mic, affirmative. Updated profiles from Edwards made the difference. How do we look from your side? Like a miracle in motion, David replied. Back inside the 777, another hour ticked by. Fatigue wore at all of them. Mike's shoulders trembled. Jennifer flexed her fingers to keep the circulation flowing. Sarah forced down a bottle of water, though her stomach knotted too tight to feel thirst. Still, every rotation was executed with unwavering discipline. Finally, Mike checked the fuel gauges again, and relief softened his tired features. We're at 190,000 pounds, he announced. Within landing limits. Jennifer let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. So we can finally do this? Yes, Sarah said, but her tone carried both hope and warning. Landing will be the hardest part. Hydraulics are barely alive. We'll only get one chance. If we overshoot or lose control on final, there won't be time for correction. Mike nodded. Then we make that one chance count. Honolulu International cleared every other aircraft from the sky. Emergency vehicles lined the runway in anticipation, fire trucks, ambulances, crews standing ready under the glow of flashing lights. In the tower, controllers leaned forward, watching the radar track of Flight 447 as if willing it to make it home. As Mike guided the aircraft toward its approach point, Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady and low. Captain, on final approach you must relax your hands. Tension will translate into instability. Trust the aircraft. Trust the rhythm we've built. David's voice came through the radio again. Phoenix, we're with you all the way. You've got this. Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Thank you, Viper 1. The aircraft lined up with the runway. The sky had darkened into deep blue, the runway lights forming a glowing path ahead. Every soul aboard held their breath. 1 mile, Jennifer called. Speed 150. Mike reduced thrust exactly at the mark. The aircraft dipped slightly, then settled into its glide path. Sarah's heart pounded, but her voice remained even. Runway made. Hold your flare. The concrete rushed upward. Mike pulled gently on the yoke. The wheels hit hard, bounced once, then settled. Reverse thrust roared from the surviving engine. Speed bled away. The aircraft rumbled down the runway, slowing, slowing. 60 knots. 40. 20. Captain, Jennifer whispered. We're down. The 777 rolled to a stop. For a heartbeat, the cockpit was silent. Then Mike covered his face with both hands and laughed. Half relief, half disbelief. Jennifer wiped tears from her cheeks. Sarah closed her eyes and simply breathed. In the cabin, applause erupted, raw, emotional, grateful. Above them, the F-22s performed a slow victory roll before heading back toward Hickam. And in that moment, Sarah knew. They had survived the impossible. The hours after landing felt unreal, as if the world was moving faster than any of them could process. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft, paramedics moving through the cabin checking passengers one by one. Shock, tears, shaky laughter. Every emotion played out across the faces of people who had been minutes from disaster. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured. A few bruises, a few sprained wrists, but every single soul on board was alive. That fact alone stunned investigators when they first stepped into the cockpit. Sarah's hands still tingled from the strain of the thrust control rhythm. She watched passengers hug one another, watched parents cry into their children's hair, watched flight attendants sag against the galley walls in exhausted relief. Her heart felt heavy and light at the same time. She had flown hundreds of dangerous missions in her life, but nothing compared to this, saving an entire flying city with nothing but timing, skill, and pure will. Investigators from the FAA, NTSB, and military soon crowded around her, asking questions, replaying data, trying to understand how a crippled Boeing 777 had stayed in the sky for hours. Sarah explained the thrust modulation technique, the physics behind it, the updated profiles from Edwards. They listened, stunned. One NTSB specialist murmured, "This shouldn't have worked," but it did. Another whispered, "We need to teach this." But Sarah avoided the cameras gathering outside. She wanted silence, not spotlights. Yet the Air Force Public Affairs Office insisted she speak briefly. She stood in front of a semicircle of reporters, still wearing her civilian clothes, hair disheveled from the long ordeal. "Captain Chin," one reporter said, "people are calling you a hero today." Sarah shook her head softly. "I'm a pilot who used training at the right time. The real heroes are Captain Brennan and First Officer Park. They fought that aircraft for 3 hours before we ever touched down." Another reporter asked, "Did you use classified techniques?" "I used methods authorized for emergencies," Sarah said. "And I followed proper protocol. Nothing matters more than the lives on board." "What were you feeling up there? Were you afraid?" Sarah paused, searching for an honest answer. "Fear isn't the enemy," she said quietly. "Fear keeps you alert. But courage is doing your job anyway. My focus was the passengers. Nothing else." In the weeks that followed, the investigation confirmed the engine failure was caused by a hidden manufacturing defect. Boeing issued an immediate service bulletin, and airlines across the world inspected their fleets. Flight 447 story spread quickly. Articles, interviews, aviation forums calling it the miracle descent. But inside the aviation community, the focus was not on the miracle. It was on the technique that saved the aircraft. The FAA, working with the Air Force and aviation engineers, created a new training program based entirely on the recovery method Sarah had demonstrated. They named it Phoenix Training after her call sign. It was the first time experimental military techniques had been adapted for commercial pilot programs on such a scale. Sarah helped design the syllabus, traveling between bases and airlines, teaching pilots the delicate rhythm of differential thrust control. One day, after a long session with airline crews, a young pilot approached her in the hallway. "Captain Chin," he said shyly, "my daughter is 5. When I fly, I think about getting home to her safely. You've given me another tool to do that." "Thank you." Sarah smiled gently. "Stay sharp, stay curious, and always trust the physics." Months later, in a quiet ceremony at Edwards Air Force Base, Colonel Peterson pinned a third Distinguished Flying Cross on her uniform. "You didn't just save a flight, he told her. You changed aviation. But Sarah never framed the medal. Instead, she kept a single photograph on her office wall. United Flight 447 resting safely on the Honolulu runway, surrounded by fire trucks, the evening sky glowing behind it. Years passed. Sarah continued test flying, pushing prototypes to their limits, mentoring younger pilots, refining emergency recovery methods. And whenever she crossed paths with Major David Martinez, the two would share coffee and talk about that extraordinary day in the sky. David once asked her quietly, "Phoenix, how did you stay so calm when everything was falling apart?" Sarah looked out the window at the desert horizon. Experience, training, but also choice. You don't wait for courage to appear. You choose to act even when you're terrified. That's what keeps people alive. At the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, she was invited to speak at a ceremony honoring aviation safety innovations. After her talk, a little girl approached her clutching a notebook. "Are you Phoenix?" she asked, eyes wide. "You saved all those people." Sarah knelt so their eyes were level. "I helped," she said softly. "But you know what? I was scared too. Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do what's right even when you are." "I want to be a pilot," the girl whispered. Sarah smiled. "Then learn everything you can. Ask questions, work hard, and believe in yourself. One day, you might save lives too." That night, alone in her hotel room overlooking Washington, D.C., Sarah opened an email from Jennifer Park. "I just became an instructor pilot. I'm teaching Phoenix techniques to every student. You changed my life. You changed all of ours." Sarah read the message twice. Then she closed her laptop and looked out at the glowing city below. 200 people were living their lives because she'd happened to sit in seat 24C. 200 voices, 200 futures, 200 stories continuing because she refused to stay silent when the world tilted sideways. For Sarah Chin, Phoenix, that was enough. More than enough.